So the first match of the Bledisloe Cup is nearly here. The Wallabies taking on New Zealand on Australian soil. And the importance of this first match cannot be underestimated. Only a 2-match series. If the All Blacks win here, they secure the Bledisloe Cup no matter what happens next week, which maybe would bring some changes for Scott Robinson's side. But for the Australians and Joe Schmidt, this is the opportunity to make a huge statement. In match number 1, second game's taken place in Wellington, a location where recently New Zealand haven't found a huge amount of success. So that is exactly what Australia will want to do, but New Zealand, they've gone strong, they've gone experienced, and in this preview we're going to be looking through at the lineups, the key players to watch out for, and also a prediction at the end of who we think will win Bledisloe Cup match 1. Looking through at the lineups, we will start with the away side, the All Blacks. They have made a couple changes in their starting lineup, but overall, pretty much what was anticipated for Scott Robertson here. The main change that they did make is in that number 1 jersey. Ethan de Groot makes his way back into the side after his injury. That is to replace Tamaiti Williams, now finds himself coming off the bench. Cody Taylor keeps his spot at number 2 after a very strong game up against the Springboks 2 weeks ago. And then number 3, Tyrell Lomax, received that last minute yellow card up against the Boks, but overall has been a very strong option for the ABs throughout the Rugby Championship. In the locking duo, it is the captain, Scott Barrett, at number 4, with number 5 being the inform Tupavai. Moving on to the loose board trio. This is where they've decided to go with what they went with in the second game up against South Africa, which was the first starting opportunity for Wallace Satiti. He is a great player. He's done well for the Chiefs all throughout Super Rugby Pacific, and I have a feeling he's got a very bright future at international level as well. Now, he is normally a number 8, but they're playing him at 6. But anywhere you have him in that loose board trio, he's going to be physical, and he's going to give you a strong performance. Number 7, the All Blacks have gone with Sam Cane. He is getting closer and closer to his 100 caps. Of course, that is the goal for Sam Cane before he does hang up the international boots. But he has still got a few more to go. Number 8, Ardie Savia, someone who some thought would be the number 7 in this game, but instead keeps his spot as the vice-captain and as the man at the back of the scrum. In the back line, Cortez Ratama and Damien McKenzie, staying with that same combination that they used in the last game up against the Springboks. In the midfield, this is also where we see the same combination. Geordie Barrett, number 12, number 13, Rieko Ioane. Now, I've been saying this for a couple weeks, and I feel like the statement still reigns true, but at the same time, it might not matter. Rieko Ioane needs a massive game here to keep his spot in the starting lineup, or at least we think that is what he'd need to do. But for some reason, he keeps on getting selected, even when he has those below par performances. But one thing he does bring you is experience in their number 13 jersey. Another option was Billy Proctor. He hasn't had a huge amount of minutes at international level, but perhaps match number 2 is where we see Proctor get his chance. Number 11, Caleb Clark. He has been playing brilliantly throughout this Rugby Championship, actually right up there when it comes to the leading try scorers of the competition. Number 14, Will Jordan. He did play 15 last week. They've moved him back to the right wing here. And then number 15, Beauden Barrett. Now, something that is underappreciated, I think, a little bit is Beauden Barrett's vision. And I believe after the way we saw Australia defend last week, that is where Beauden Barrett could find a huge amount of success here up against the Wallabies in the first contest. Looking through at this Wallabies side, though, they have also made a few changes compared to what they had up against Argentina. They had a great start to that contest, but just seemed to dwindle as the match went on. Went from leading by 20 to losing by 40, which is just a scoreline you don't see very often. When you talk about a side going from a massive high to an all-time low, that is what the Australians experienced last week. But now that they have had that, perhaps they can make those adjustments and have a lot stronger of a performance here. But in their front row, it is Angus Bell at number 1, Matt Faisler 2, and Taniela Tupou as the number 3. Now, they've got the experience of Alan Alaratoa and James Slipper to come off the bench here for the Aussies, which means these 3 need to empty that gas tank. Taniela Tupou, Angus Bell, they're both dangerous ball runners, but they also can be dangerous in a breakdown as well as the scrum. And if they can empty their tanks, like I mentioned, 50 minutes into the game, they bring on that experience for the later stages of the contest. I think it would set Australia up relatively well, but of course it depends on what the score is sitting at when they do make their way off. In the locking duo, Nick Frost at number 4 and Jeremy Williams at number 5. There's a bit of a concern about the lack of experience that the Australians have in their locking duo off the bench. They've got Lukan Salakaia-Lotto, who I think will add quite a bit when we get to the later stages of the match, but it's whether or not Frost and Williams can at least be competitive up till that point. Now, I do think Nick Frost, even though he had a bit of an injury earlier on in the Rugby Championship, is still a really strong option for the future in terms of that locking duo. Jeremy Williams, I feel like he's yet to prove himself at international level, so hopefully he has a big game here up against the ABs. In the loose forward trio, Rob Bellatini at number 6, number 7, Fraser McWright coming in for the leading tackler of the competition, Carlo Tizzano. So that is a bold call from the Australians, but when you look at this loose forward trio and you see Bellatini, McWright, and also the captain at number 8, Harry Wilson, that is perhaps a combination that we could see for quite some time in their Wallabies trio. But in the back line, Nick White at number 9 with Noah Lolesio coming back in at number 10. I'll be honest, when I saw this lineup, 10 was somewhere that really concerned me because in those first games up against South Africa, Noah Lolesio couldn't really get a lot going forward for the Australians. But that's not to say that with a bit more time in that 10 jersey, he can't grow into that role. And he'll be up against Damian McKenzie, who is under his own pressure to perform at number 10. So perhaps those two could actually have a very good head-to-head throughout this matchup. Number 11, Marika Korombedi. He is up there in terms of the clean breaks in the competition, even though he has played less games than some of the other men who were on that list. Hunter Paisami and Len Iketel in the midfield, with Andrew Callaway out on the right wing and Tom Wright at number 15. A welcome change for the Aussies, having Tom Wright back after his injury. He's got a long boot on him. He's also defensively sound, so a great player to have for the Australians. But when we look through at key players for New Zealand, I feel like in this situation, key players are slightly different to who needs a big game. So I'm going to be basing it off who needs to perform in this contest. For one, Rieko Ioane. If he doesn't have a strong game, like I mentioned, I'm not sure what the plan will be in the future for that number 13 jersey. But surely Anton Leonard-Brown or Billy Proctor would eventually get that chance at outside centre. I think that Ioane, he's got all the tools to have a great competition and have a great game up against the Wallabies. But something just hasn't been working lately. And I don't know if it is that combination with Jordie Barrett. Perhaps something has changed compared to last year, if it's tactical, but something just isn't quite clicking for Ioane, so he needs a massive game here to keep his spot in the starting lineup. In terms of the rest of the positions, I think Scott Barrett is another guy that really needs to have a phenomenal game up against the Australians, because if he can't start putting performances together, and he is the captain, what does that do for the rest of the team? Should it be that Barrett could start coming off the bench or move to 6? Just something to help him in the right direction, but either way, needs a massive one up against the Wallabies. And the last man, I think it's Damian McKenzie, because he's still got a lot of naysayers. At this point in time, people still want to see Beauden Barrett as that number 10. McKenzie, goal-kicking wise, needs to be on point here, but also just tactically. He's actually had a strong Rugby Championship when you look through at his stats. He's been one of the main channels that New Zealand have been using when it comes to getting clean breaks. But he doesn't get a lot of credit for that sometimes, because people look at that goal kicking, they look at him smiling, and they get annoyed. So hopefully, he can also have a big game here, set up that All Blacks backline. Maybe that helps Rieko Ioane find a bit of form too. But looking through at the Australians, big game needed from Noah Lolesio. He has got a lot of naysayers, just like McKenzie. So if he is able to step up here up against New Zealand, that would be a huge confidence booster, not just for him, but also for the coaches and the supporters of the Wallabies as well. Big game needed from Andrew Callaway. We didn't see a huge amount of him throughout the matches up against Argentina. I feel like he is one of those guys that when he's in form, he's extremely hard to stop, but when he's out of form, you don't really see a huge amount of him. So hopefully he can have a great game here. He's going head-to-head with Caleb Clark, so defensively has to be on point, because Caleb Clark, if you're basing it off his form, he's going to be trying to run straight over the top of him. And then also I'm going to say for the last players that need a big one for the Aussies, it's got to be the locking duo, specifically Jeremy Williams. I mentioned how he hasn't proven at international level as of yet, but that doesn't mean that he can't be. If he plays well here, perhaps he could cement himself in that locking duo. At the end of the day, it's still wide open, so the chance is there for Williams to secure the jersey. But moving on now to a couple interesting stats. Now, New Zealand, away from home recently, haven't had the best run. They've only won one of their last 4 away games. But when it comes to playing Australia, that is where their record is a lot stronger. Of their last 12 games up against Australia, they have only lost 1. They also drew 1, but that is still a very impressive winning rate for this AB's team. But the question is, with both of these sides coming off a loss, will the same confidence be there that we are used to seeing for the All Blacks? At the end of the day, across those matches up against Australia, the last 12, New Zealand have won by a margin of just over 17 points, which tells us that if this game goes similar to what it did between Australia and Argentina in their last performance, New Zealand could secure that Bledisloe Cup as long as they finish well, which is something New Zealand have struggled to do throughout this Rugby Championship. We're looking at the bench. Can they make the difference? They haven't got Patrick Tuipulotu. They haven't got someone like a Billy Proctor. Instead, in that number 23 jersey, going with Sevu Reece, who has been extremely out of form across his last 2 games. They still have Anton Lienert-Brown, though, which I think is a very strong option to have up against the Aussies, alongside Basilio Tossi, who is a man that maybe some people don't know that much about at the moment. But after this game, perhaps they'll know exactly how strong Basilio Tossi is. But nonetheless, we are now up to that stage of the video where I give a prediction. And I'll be honest, as much as I've thought about who is going to be lining up for these two sides, so who New Zealand were going to be going with, whether they were willing to take some risks, and also who Australia were going to have heading into this game after that heavy defeat up against Argentina. And up till this point, I hadn't even thought about what I think the score will be between these two sides, which is kind of bad, seeing as we're only less than 2 days away from the contest. But now that we know the lineups, I feel like that helps a little bit more. New Zealand have gone purely with that experienced side, very minimal risks, but they're hoping for the maximum reward. Australia, just like Joe Schmidt has done throughout his tenure as coach, he's gone with some risks, but also he's got that foundation that when the Wallabies are playing well, they can be extremely dangerous. It's just whether or not they can play well for the full 80 minutes. It's something they struggled to do up against the Welsh. Something that we've seen time and time again let Australia down. But can this game, first match of the Bledisloe Cup, be the one that does break the trend? I'm going to say no, just off the bat. You know, I think that they'll have a decent crack throughout this contest. But I just do think New Zealand, with their lineup here, surely they feel like they've got something to prove. They lost their last 2 games up against South Africa, and I know those were both by thin margins, but not being able to score a try in their last game. Australia, to their credit, they did score some tries. They just conceded about 15 throughout that game up against Argentina. So both of these sides coming into this game with very different recent situations. But one thing's for sure, you need that first match of the Bledisloe Cup. I'm saying New Zealand will win it, and I do think it will be relatively high scoring. So I'm going to say New Zealand win it 38 points to 23. I think Australia will get a few points here. I hope they do anyway. I feel like the last thing we want for the Bledisloe Cup is an absolute blowout in match number 1. If Australia win this one, it gets extremely interesting heading into that second match at Sky Stadium, like I mentioned, as New Zealand's record in Wellington hasn't been that great over the last little while. But nonetheless, do let me know your score predictions in the comments down below, as well as who you think will be the standout player for each side throughout this contest. But thank you all very much for tuning in. We will be doing the live commentary on the channel. 5:45 PM New Zealand time is when this game is kicking off on Saturday. It's going to be an awesome one. We will be here for every minute of the contest. But thank you all very much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you all for the next one.